So this is pretty crazy. This is actually apparently really happening. This is not like a scam channel. This is an actual guy who does informs you about things that have been in the news in America. He's actually saying that he claims that the authoritarian British government are being investigated by the US State Department. So apparently this is actually happening. Apparently the American government are actually investigating the British government. I hope they're going to investigate them about everything. So this is actually like just amazing, really. I think it's pretty interesting and cool. Like, who could believe it could actually happen? But apparently it is happening. Let's just hope that they're investigating them over multiple things. They're probably not impressed about to do with all those islands, all the deals with all those islands, what they were wanting to keep for US military strategic places. But anyway, I just wanted to say that earlier on that I did a couple of talks about the Attorney General and questioning why Labour had suddenly started having Labour Attorney Generals all being peers, and the fact that historically only really that Geoffrey Palmer guy has been a peer while he's Attorney General because of the restoration of the Crown, and he went after all of the, not only the people in the Commons who, were Oliver Cromwell supporters, but also members of the House of Lords who had been Oliver Cromwell supporters, right? So that was a key thing. I didn't really get those words in that other video. So he had an Attorney General who could go after the Lords who were Oliver Cromwell, who had previously been Oliver Cromwell supporters, right? He probably might have needed one because of the, although, maybe the law lords could have done it, but, if you've got an Attorney General, he's got certain positions and roles. So, although, historically, you see, Magna Carta, the barons are meant to be, in Magna Carta, the barons are meant to be their own judges of their equals, not the commons, right? So why would you need an attorney? If the barons, had, been Oliver Cromwell supporters, then why don't they sort it out themselves? If the barons come with their own judge their equals, then, apparently all of the barons who had been Oliver Cromwell supporters and accused would not be the ones who were making the decisions, right? All of the barons, or the law barons who had not been Oliver Cromwell supporters, why do you need the Attorney General? Well, if they, because, that's how it's meant to work through Magna Carta before this Constitutional Reform Act. So, but he wanted one of the barons to be Attorney General as well. So, I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did the prosecutions, but they went straight back to having a Commons, a member of the House of Commons as Attorney General afterwards. So, one of the things that's important about that issue is that I didn't really say the words in the other video so much. It's an elected position. That's what I should have said more in the other video. Or I don't actually really think. I think I might have just mentioned it once, but the Attorney General is meant to be an elected position, right? And always has been. We vote and elect for our MPs. Members of Parliament are voted for by the public, even before the Great Reform Act, when, only rich people or landowners could vote, right? This is when only privileged people or, people with money and land could even vote. Even then, right? Even then, the Attorney General was chosen from the members of Parliament. Are any of you lawyers, is there anyone who's a decent lawyer here? But obviously, if a lot of the, knights and sheriffs and that lot have been involved in legal processes, but they had to leave their positions to serve in Parliament, right? Out of everyone who ends up getting elected by the people, I mean, this is the thing, right? Parliament is meant to be, the House of Commons is meant to be all of the people who the people have elected for, right? That's how you get in there. You don't get in there because, Prince Charles, makes you, chief crown prosecutor, you get the job and then you get to choose your staff, right? The people vote you in, right? And then from those, they choose a speaker and they choose the prime minister and so forth. Now, I think the thing with Keir Starmer is this, right? Starmer was never elected into the Crown Prosecutor's job, right? He got in with the police and he got in, with the Privy Council prosecutions and he got cushy jobs and he got absorbed into the state as part of the cabinet. But he was never voted in, he was never elected, right? Until he stood for Parliament. Now, he did get elected into Parliament, right? He was elected into Parliament. Okay, he's the leader of the party, but he might not have got elected, right? Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the party before him. Jeremy Corbyn is not a lawyer. But with Keir Starmer, right, so he gets voted into Parliament and is the leader of the party. So out of all his MPs, you see, he might not have had any Labour MPs. Labour could have done very poorly, right? Labour might not have done well in the election. It could have been all Liberal Democrats, right? And then Keir Starmer wouldn't have even had a majority and it'd have just been, an opposition party leader, right? But Keir Starmer's party got a majority in Parliament, right? But he might not have done, right? So, okay, right, you're going to form a government. Now, he's the leader of the party. Now, this is what I think. Keir Starmer really thinks that he should be the Attorney General. He was the chief Crown Prosecutor, right? He's a legal guy. I'm a legal guy around here. I'm the best barrister. I'm a top barrister, who's the best lawyer in England? Who's the top lawyer in England now? Well, me, right? But, just a minute, I'm the party leader. Well, you have to be Prime Minister, right? Keir Starmer thought that he should be the Attorney General of England, right? And Prime Minister. Because when he looked round, at the rabble in front of him, who we got here? Lindsay Hoyle's been taken away from his party because he got pulled in to be the Speaker, right? He had to withdraw from party politics, right? He had to withdraw from Labour, right? So, what have I got to work with here, right? Tom, Dick and Harry, right? Rachel Reeves, right? So, what have I got to work with here, all these people are the people who stood for Labour, the members of the party, but, I might not know them that well, I might not get in with them, I might have never met them before, right? What have I got to work with, right? This is what I've got, It's not like when he's, you can't pick and choose, in the Crown Prosecution Service. Oh, I don't like this person. You got the pick of the bunch, right? Who do you want to, be your, assistant, and so forth? Who do you want to be the Director of Prosecutions, Who's going to get promoted? Who's pulling all the strings, right? You're not pulling all the strings necessarily in an election unless you're cheating, right? So I think when Keir Starmer looks around, right, who's better than me at law? Who could possibly be better than me at law? And who's even, stood for an election? Most lawyers don't want to work in Parliament, right? So, all he's got to work with is the people who stood for Labour who got elected, right? Some of them might be lawyers, but some of them might not. I think Rachel Reeves did banking. Simon Reevell was our MP. He was a barrister, he was a lawyer, right? But he was a Conservative, not Labour, right? What happens if, nobody with any legal experience got elected into Parliament, right? And Labour didn't get anyone voted in who had been a lawyer, right? Jacob Rees-Mogg, Jeremy Hunt, all these Penny Mordaunt, when she's brandishing King Charles' sword, then she's gone, right? You got all these. The only people you've got are the people who stood for the election, right? They might have had key strategic people, right, in the Labour elections, right? We need to get, this person, and this person needs to stand, because if we win, we need someone who could do law, right? But what if they didn't get elected? What happens if Labour's plan failed? What happens if the Tories' plan failed? What happens if Jeremy Hunt Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, each of these key people didn't get elected, like the Conservatives lost a lot of MPs, right? What happens if only specific people manage to get elected, right? Who's going to be the Attorney General? Now, this is the thing, right? Look around at the Labour MPs, right? I don't think Keir Starmer, right, thought that any of the other Labour MPs were good enough to be the Attorney General at law. I think that he thought, well, there is no one better than me at law here, so how can I make anyone the Attorney General, right? And this is why I think that one of the reasons he went for Baron Hermer, because he thought, right, who's loyal to me and then who's as good, if not better than me at law, right? But the thing is, Baron Hermer has not been elected into the House of Commons. He's not been elected. The people of England haven't voted for him. Now, the Attorney General is meant to be someone who's been elected. It's an elected position, and it always has been, except for Geoffrey Palmer, right? Who's the exception. And even then, I don't think Geoffrey Palmer is the exception, because I think Geoffrey Palmer was elected. I think that Geoffrey Palmer was elected, and I think that he did get in through election, and then he's made a knight, but then he was made a baron. So it could very well be that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and now Starmer are the first people who have done this, to have an Attorney General of England, which is ye olde ancient and the Prime Minister of England, and possibly even it's a well-recorded and established position, older than the records of the Attorney General go back older than the Speaker of Parliament, right? I think Hermer probably is one of the only Attorney Generals in history of England who has not been elected and voted in by the public, right? And possibly Patricia Scotland and the Goldsmith, I think Geoffrey Palmer did get elected, but then he was made into a baron for the job. But other than that, it's meant, even when the masses didn't vote, even when only the wealthy voted, at least they voted them in, right? They voted these people into Parliament, and then they decided who's going to do what, right? Okay, you can be the Speaker. You can be the Attorney General, and now only the Prime Minister, right? This is the thing. So, what Keir Starmer's actually done is he doesn't. I don't think that he's treating the job like, okay, these are the people the public wanted, right? And from this group of people, we're going to decide between ourselves who's going to do what job, right? I think Keir Starmer's like, I'm the only, this is not, we do have things in the Crown Prosecution Service. I choose who I want in my positions, right? The people don't choose who they want in the positions. I choose, right? So effectively he's put Hermer in, and the people did not vote him in, and into a position that's older than the Prime Minister, and an electoral position. And then you've got and then you've got all those conflict of privileges interests as well, which add to it. So I really think that, okay, Tony Blair did it and Gordon Brown, but I think Gordon Brown only did it because Tony Blair did it. And did Keir Starmer only do it because Gordon Brown and Tony Blair did it? Possibly, but I think Keir Starmer did it as well, because really, I think that Keir Starmer wanted to, I think in Keir Starmer's mind, he thinks that he is the Attorney General, right? So he didn't want an Attorney General in the Commons because he didn't want anyone to have conflict of interest with him, particularly not when he's got some of his own party voting the other way and things like that going on, or whatever. He might have to withdraw the whip, Can you imagine if he appointed someone as Attorney General and they had to draw the whip from them, So, I think that he really would have liked to split himself into two and being the Prime Minister and Attorney General. But if he had someone in the Lords, then he hasn't got an Attorney General in the Commons who might, not agree with him on everything. Right? This is the thing. I would have said that Starmer has really made history, really, by having someone as an Attorney General who's not been voted in and elected by the voters of England, picked from those who have been elected. But because Gordon Brown and Tony Blair have also done it, you can't say, oh, it's maybe Starmer, thought that. But, Tony Blair was a lawyer, but he was only an employment lawyer, And, Gordon Brown, I don't think Gordon Brown was a lawyer. I think Gordon Brown was just following on from what Tony Blair did, but wanted to make some financial tweakages. I'm not sure what possessed the Labour Party to do it. I'm sure I said in another video, most barristers and lawyers are quite, powerful people. They don't need to be barons and lords. I don't think the Conservative Party, they've got, their members are all affluent, people, wealthy people. The Conservative members are barristers and lawyers usually. It's usually Labour, the working class. Most of the Labour lawyers and barristers are all the Crown Prosecution Service because they're on crap wages, right? The Crown Prosecution Service are meant to be, you might as well be the Labour Party because, they're the poorly paid lawyers and barristers who don't make, hundreds of thousands and millions of pounds out of cases, they get paid peanuts. They're the Labour Party barristers, I think the Conservatives don't need to have a peer as the Attorney General because they're already, if you're a Conservative Tory and you're a lawyer or a barrister, no one messes with you. You're already powerful anyway. But I think because Labour is kind of like being the poor working class kind of like party, it's sort of wanted to feel a bit more powerful than the Conservatives and once they get into Parliament, so had to one-up them somehow. But, Tony Blair hardly, I don't know how he managed to represent the Labour Party because he's hardly half a Scargill, Tony Blair, I think Tony Blair was sold to the public, he used to have a hole in his sweater and, he's MP for Sedgefield and, when you actually read about it, he went, he went to university and he went to, Lincoln's Inn and, trained up as a lawyer and everything. So he really should have fallen in with the Conservatives, but, just because he's an employment lawyer, he ended up being supported with the Labour Party. But for what he's done to the country, he might as well have been a Conservative. This is the thing. So unless there's something going on with the Queen, I don't know. But why didn't they do it? Why didn't Margaret? Why, if it was something to do with the Queen, you would have thought that Margaret Thatcher would have, put a woman, like Chief Justice, or unless at the time they were still trying to lube up, Vaseline up the attitude of a lot of those, peers and barons, oh no, I can't have a woman in there. Well, you've got a woman as a Prime Minister, You'd have thought that the first woman would have been an Attorney General first, and then women could have worked their way up to being Prime Minister, right? If you got a woman as Prime Minister, then why not have a woman as the Attorney General or, whatever? Or it just happened to be coincidence that they didn't pick one, So, Margaret Thatcher could have done it, you'd have thought so, but, what was the reason why she didn't? Is it meant to be chosen from the elected MPs? And is it really meant to be kind of, like the Speaker? Because it's older than the Prime Minister, I would have thought that it's meant to be chosen from people who've been elected and voted in, right? Which one of us should be the Speaker, we are the elected persons. Now let's amongst ourselves choose who is going to be the Prime Minister, who's going to be the Speaker, who's going to be the Attorney General. It's almost like a school nativity play, right? But, you got to get elected, But, I'd like to, I would like to, it would have been, for me, it would have been better if Keir Starmer had have been the first person who'd done it, because it kind of suits him more that, he would think, well, I should be the Attorney General, but you're Prime Minister. I can't do both, can I, right? This is the thing, but we can't have anyone else from these elected MPs being the Attorney General, because I want to be in charge of the law in this house, so we'll have to have someone from the other house as the Attorney General. But there's definitely, it clearly is Blair. It's a Blairite thing, and they've just passed it on, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were both in the government together, and then when Gordon Brown, took over, he only really did some different financial tweakages, really, not really that much different from what they'd been planning before. So I would say that Gordon Brown kind of like it was kind of like a baton pass, just passing the baton from hand to hand, and that's just what they said, right, we're going to, so it was more like a Tony Blair and Gordon Brown thing, like a partnership thing. Okay, we're going to have Attorney Generals from the House of Lords, right? So the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown bit of it, I would have said it's kind of like the same package. It's kind of like one package. It's kind of like, okay, we're doing this, right? So, I don't know if Starmer's just gone, hey, this is what the Labour Party does now, right? Or what? But the Tories didn't. The Conservative Party just did not do it. So part Blair, part Starmer, but how can Starmer have? how can the Chief Crown Prosecutor of England have anyone in the House of Commons ranking above him legally in a legal position? Although because what the Attorney General might have to prosecute Starmer, but we can't have that, can we? Because Starmer will do the prosecuting in the Commons. And in fact, he won't have anyone in the Commons. We're not having an Attorney General in the Commons. There isn't there isn't an Attorney General in the House of Commons. No, there is no one who can prosecute me. Because that's the thing with Keir Starmer can say, hey, look, it's Baron Hermer. He can't judge me on my privileges because they're separate. So therefore, there is no Attorney General, right? So how can possibly they have an Attorney General? Because really, Baron Hermer shouldn't really, how can a member of the House of Lords prosecute any of the Commons anyway when they're privileged, which is quite interesting position. It's almost kind of like, the members of the House of Commons, if they be their own judges between them, where's their Attorney General, who's going to prosecute the prosecution? Or there isn't one, how can he come to the bar? Because it's meant to be a bar, isn't it? The bar of Parliament. But how can you're not really supposed to have members of the House of Lords at the bar of Parliament, really? I think they have a conference. There's been a couple of very rare conferences, I think, when they've got both houses together on certain occasions. It's quite interesting. But then you've got the Supreme Court anyway, which completely changes things. I think Gordon Brown really made a complete and total mess of the whole country, really, constitutionally. I know that Jeremy Corbyn kind of supports all those changes, but they've made a bit of a mess of it, really.